Hey, Oddcast listeners. The past couple of episodes of my True Word Stuff podcast have dealt with like the multiverse and space and all sorts of cool stuff. And we have gotten a lot of requests for an episode of the Oddcast that we did a long time ago. It was my missing time experience, something that I've only ever talked about once in that episode, because when I talk about it, I break out in chills and I start feeling queasy and I want to cry. So, by request, here it is.
Well, we always have an odd one in the crowd.
So it's kind of odd.
Decidedly
Doesn't
odd.
that strike you as a little bit odd?
No, that doesn't strike me as a little bit odd.
It's the Bob and Sheri Oddcast with stuff we wouldn't, couldn't, or shouldn't do on the regular show. Now, here's the Oddcast.
I'm going to tell a story in today's Oddcast that I have told very few people in my life because it's a story that I struggle to understand. I know it happened, but I don't know what happened, and I can't convince you that it happened. And part of the reason that I don't talk about this and haven't shared this story is because when I remember back to that night, I have this feeling of panic. Like I feel a little choked off. Like this memory it's almost like it's a toothache. And if I touch it even gently, it throbs. And so there's something about it that makes me shy away from it, that makes me skittish. And when I've only talked about this maybe twice in my whole life, and when I've tried to tell this story, I sound nuts. And so it's something I haven't ever talked about, but I'm going to tell it today on the Oddcast. And before I describe what happened, there's a couple of things you need to know. This took place in Wilmington, North Carolina. I was living in Wilmington, working during the day at WECT, the NBC affiliate there, the television station. And at night, I was delivering pizza for Domino's. I lived in an apartment with two roommates. One was my college boyfriend, and the other was a friend of ours from Temple. And the three of us had moved down to Wilmington together to work on a movie, which we did. And then the whole movie studio situation there went kind of haywire. So we all had to sort of scatter and get jobs. We lived in an apartment not too far from WECT, off of Highway 421, that was around this sort of, not really a lake, but an oversized pond. And there were walking trails around this pond. And the trees dripped with Spanish moss. And it was a mysterious and beautiful place. The apartments were dirt cheap. But it just so happened at that time that they were in this gorgeous setting. And of course, I'd grown up in Wyoming and the Northeast. We didn't have Spanish moss. That was something I'd only read about in books. And it was really beautiful. And not too far down Highway 421, there was a high school where there would be, high school football games. There was a Chinese restaurant. It's kind of that stretch of Highway 421 then and now was pretty commercial, but the rent was cheap and three kids right out of college could swing it. So, like I said, I worked during the day at WECT for $160 a week. That was my full-time salary as a producer. Stay in school, kids. The media is not the way to go. And I worked at night for Domino's. So basically, I worked most of the time. But on the night that this event happened was one of my rare nights when I wasn't delivering pizza. And I was home with my two roommates. And my college boyfriend, great guy, Trekkie, sci-fi, comic booky guy, just exactly like you would think I would date. He was watching some Star Trek The Next Generation marathon, and our other roommate was upstairs in his room strumming the guitar or whatever. And this was all before cell phones and YouTube and the internet and all of that. This was right before cell phones exploded and came out of the bag phone stage, where it weighed as much as a cinder block and became a flip phone kind of thing. And so none of us had cell phones. We didn't have YouTube, hadn't been invented yet. And so I was bored. And one of the things that I had taken up, I was going through a coloring book phase They didn't have adult coloring books back then. They had kid coloring books. And I was going through kind of a random coloring phase. And I had colored through the last of my coloring books and decided that I was going to take a run to the drugstore. I think it was a CVS up on Shipyard Boulevard, and grab myself a new coloring book and some M&Ms and a fresh box of Crayola crayons. And so I got in my car and I headed for the drugstore. It was about 7 o'clock at night. So it's 7 o'clock at night, and it was winter time, and it was dark, and I pulled out of the apartment parking lot. I was driving a white Ford Escort EXP that my father got in some weird illicit drug deal bargain trade. And so that's what I was driving, and I drove to the CVS. And I remember, I went into the CVS and went over to the section where they sell school supplies and stuff, and I got a couple of coloring books, and a new box of 64 crayons and a couple bags of M&Ms, and paid for it. Got back in my little Ford Escort and headed home. So something that's always been true about me, it was true then and it's true now. And I think Max knows this about me. I never, if I can, I never take the same route twice. I'm always looking to see new things, So, even now, like if I go to the grocery store near my house, there's about 8 ways I can do it. And so back then, I could take Shipyard Boulevard to Highway 421 and then turn down one street and kind of get into the vicinity of my apartment. But that was boring. There were so many other cool things to see, and I had only been living in Wilmington for about 6 months at that point, and I was still exploring and looking around. And so I decided, as I was coming down and passing the high school, that I was going to take a different street that I never had, that would also dead end into the road that looped the pond. Are you with me so far? Can you picture that in your head?
Yes.
There's a pond and there's a road that runs around it, and all of the trees and the Spanish moss. And it was pretty dark back there. There weren't it's a park, there weren't tons of streetlights and everything. It was dark and very beautiful. So I turned off of Shipyard onto 421, and then I made the turn onto this street that I was pretty sure would connect to the road that ran the circumference of the pond that would allow me to get back to my apartment. So I left the house around 7, went to the drugstore, got the coloring books, the crayons, the M&Ms, back in the car. And I'm driving down this street, it's not even a street, it's just like a little random side road that paralleled the football field from the high school. And as I'm coming to where it's going to T-bone into the lake, into the road that ran around the lake or the pond, the strangest thing happened. Suddenly, in my rearview mirror was like high beams, like incredibly bright high beams, but up higher than like a car. So a Ford Escort is pretty low to the ground, right? This was more like all of a sudden there was a tractor trailer behind me. It was that difference in height. And I glanced up into the rearview mirror because the light kind of reflected off the mirror and blinded me. And when I glanced up into the rearview mirror, what I saw, and this is the part where I feel sick right now. This is the part where, like, anytime I try to remember this or describe it, it's like there's a toothache. Like I shy away from it. What I saw was like a vehicle that was both white and black. Like it had a big black, windshield kind of a thing, but it was, the rest of it was white, and it was really bright, and it was behind me, but also coming over the top of the back of my car. Now, I will pause here and tell you, I know I sound like I'm crazy or that I'm lying. This is the best way I can describe it. It was behind me, but it was right on top of me at the same time. And I tell you, as God is my witness, the road behind me and in front of me had been empty a split second ago. This was a little back road taking you into a loop of road that was not very much traveled, especially at night and especially in the wintertime. And I'm looking, and it felt like forever that I was looking, and like, what is, like, who is behind me? Like, is that a monster truck? Like, what is behind me? Behind me and on top of me. And in that moment, and now, like, there's an echo of the adrenaline and the absolute panic that I felt. I was in an absolute state of fight or flight panic. I was terrified. Adrenaline flooded my body. I broke out into a sweat. I'm gripping the steering wheel of my Ford Escort EXP. What is that? And then I was home. And I don't remember driving up to our apartment complex. I don't remember parking. I don't remember walking. And the way these apartments were, like, you had a bit of a walk, like you would park, and then there would be, the apartments were set back, and they were cluster apartments. So you might have like 8 units in one little cluster building and then 8 units in another, and so on and so on. And you didn't just get out of your car and walk up to your front door. You had to walk around this like little sidewalk. I don't remember that. I remember, what is that? And this feeling of just absolute panic. And then I was home. And the next thing I remember, there's something behind me, and my boyfriend, David, my roommate, where the hell have you been? And I was like, what do you mean? I went to CVS. I got coloring books and M&Ms. He goes, you've been gone for hours. We didn't know what happened to you. We thought there was an accident. We didn't know where you were. Keep in mind, this is no cell phones, right? You had no way of contacting someone. If they walked out of the house and vanished, they vanished. And I was like, what are you talking about? I went to the drugstore and came straight back. He goes, where did you go? And I went to the drugstore. I came straight back. And he said, Sheri, it's after 11. You've been gone all night. Where were you? And I had no explanation for him then, and I have no explanation for you now. I lost probably, we'll say, I'll be generous and say 3 hours. I'll say that it took me an hour to go from my apartment to the drugstore and back. But somehow I was gone for over 4 hours. So that is what's called a missing time episode. And I tried to explain. I was like, I was driving. I took that, that road between the Chinese restaurant and high school. I took that because, I always like to go a new way. And something came up behind me, like a monster truck or something. And they blinded me with their headlights. And then I came home. And he was like, you've been gone for hours. I don't expect anyone who's hearing this to believe me, because I can't tell you anything more. I have no proof. I don't understand what happened. I didn't go. If Bob were here, he'd be like, you had another guy, or you went to a bar, or you fell asleep. No, none of those things. None of those things happened. I left. I went to the drugstore. I came home. And somehow I lost a little over 3 hours. And when I try so hard, and I've tried since that night, I have tried, think, remember, and I have a blank space and something that when I touch it, I jump backward from it. And I think Max will back me up here. I have a pretty extraordinary memory.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
I'm not someone who loses things or forgets things. And this incident, it scared me so much because I couldn't explain it. And I could see that I sounded like a lunatic. But I lost those 3+ hours. And the thing of it is, it's my only missing time episode that I know of for sure that I can point to and say, this weird, terrible thing happened that I'm confused by and frightened by and don't have an explanation for. And the craziest part, now this is the part that's really going to sound so crazy, is when I was looking in my rearview mirror, I didn't turn around. I did not turn my head and look at what was behind me. I'm not sure I had time to, honestly. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, not only did I break out like drenched in sweat and adrenaline and so much fear. I don't scare easy. You know, I'm not some little debutante cupcake. Like, I grew up in a violent and abusive home. I don't scare easy. I was as scared as I've ever been. And then and now I will tell you that there was like a gleeful, prankish, fucking with you kind of energy in the moment. And I can't connect that to anything. And again, I don't expect anyone to believe a single word I'm saying. I cannot convince you. I can only tell you that it happened. So that was the only time that I know I can point to and say, I lost these 3 hours and the people that I lived with were frantic. But it's not the only strange thing that happened in my life. And I don't know whether I'm fascinated by the things that I'm fascinated by because of the things that have happened to me, or I'm not sure. It's like a chicken and an egg thing, because some of my very earliest memories, and the story in my family was that I was just such a spooky, weird kid, but some of my earliest memories don't make sense. They don't make sense to me, and they don't make sense to my mom, for example, who had to grapple with the stories that I would tell as a toddler, these long, detailed, animated stories of the angels that would come and talk to me. Now, we were, Catholic, so, yay angels, right? Better that than demons. But absolute conviction on my part as a child that I was having these experiences, these wildly detailed experiences. There was one day, and I remember it, but I only remember it in flashes and pieces, that I broke down in an absolute panic in the backyard. This was before we moved to Wyoming, so I would have been first grade maybe. Broke down in an absolute panic in the backyard, screaming and screaming and screaming for my mom, because I was so frightened of this thing in the yard. And my mom came flying out of the house. I don't think she touched the ground, and grabbed me. And of course there wasn't anything there. And so the story then became, she's a spooky kid with a really vivid imagination. Okay, that's a thing that can happen. You can have a spooky kid and you can have a vivid imagination. And again, I can't ask you to believe it because I don't understand it either. Now let's fast forward. Now I'm a teenager and my parents have split up and I'm back east from Wyoming, and a multitude of strange things happened when I was a kid living out west that are stories for another day. But the thing I'm going to tell you now is I'm a teenager, probably a senior in high school, and living with my grandmother, and I was sleeping on the couch in the living room, and everyone had gone to bed, and the oven light, the light over the oven, my grandmother always left that on as a night light. And so I'm sleeping on the couch, and it was a very, very small house, like it didn't have a dining room or anything like that. It had like a kitchen with a big kitchen table and a living room and some bedrooms and an upstairs. I mean, absolutely standard American suburban post-World War II house. And so I'm asleep on the couch, and something wakes me up, and I open my eyes, and there's a figure in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, and it's silhouetted by the dim light of the oven light. And I didn't know who it was. I assumed it was my father, because who else would it be? The only people in the house at that time were me and my grandmother and my father and my younger brother, whose bedroom was upstairs. And I started to sit up, and again, what I'm about to say, I don't know how to explain it, and I can't ask you to believe it, but the figure that was silhouetted in the light raised its arm, and I felt a pulsing sensation in my forehead that radiated outward, and then I was asleep again until morning. And I know, again, if Bob were here, he would say, that was a nightmare. You had a bad dream. And maybe I did. But I've never had a dream like that before or since. I've never had a dream that was like I can close my eyes and see it. I'm right back in the space. I can feel the rough upholstery on my cheek. I can see the television that was dark because it was off behind this figure that was silhouetted in this light from the kitchen oven. And I can feel the sensation of that circle, like a ripple in a pond that radiated. I felt it radiate across my face and head, and I was out like if you've ever had anesthesia. You know when you've had anesthesia and they say, okay, we're going to count backward from 10, and you say 10, 9, 8, and you wake up in the recovery room? It was like that. I can't explain it. So these are things that I have wrestled with like my whole adult life. And I have no idea if I'm nuts, if I have an overactive imagination, if I have convinced myself of a bunch of things that aren't true, or if these are things that happened exactly as I'm describing to you, and I just can't tell you what they were. So I think part of the reason that I'm so fascinated by science and sci-fi, why I'm so intrigued by the idea of the multiverse and quantum physics and UFOs and, multiple dimensions and all of the things that sound like kooky gibberish to a lot of really rational people. Sometimes I think I'm really, really fascinated by that stuff because I can go back to my earliest memories and I have these weird things that I just cannot account for. I have memories that is it a memory? Because it doesn't make any sense. And yet it's so much like any other memory that you would have of a birthday party or Christmas. And I'm not talking, some of the memories I'm describing, I'm talking about like being 12, 13, 14, 15, 29 years old, okay? I'm not talking about baby stuff. I'm talking about things that have happened. I went into therapy in my late 20s because one night I woke up. I lived alone at the time. I was single, and I lived all alone in my house with my 2 dogs. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I was outside. And I'm like, I guess I sleepwalk now. What the whole hell? I'd never been a sleepwalker before, but I was going through some stuff, and I'm a person who lives with significant complex trauma. And, things can happen in life that can trigger you and rocket you backward a little bit. And you may start acting out or experiencing any number of things, including sleepwalking, depression, and all sorts of stuff. I was going through a tough time. But I'll tell you, I've never before woken up outside at night wearing nothing but a t-shirt. And it hasn't happened since. So I went into therapy, and the therapist said, what brings you here? And I said, I woke up outside, and that's not good. You know, a woman can't be waking up outside wearing only a t-shirt. Like, I'm scared. I live alone. Am I disassociating? Am I having a nervous breakdown? What's happening to me? And that was what first launched me into therapy. So there's no like neat bow for this oddcast. There's no way that I can pull all of this together and say, and that's what it was. And then I took a pill for it, and now everything's fine. It's just some things happened. And I know for a stone cold fact that there are people listening to this right now with their eyes bugged out, because there are things that have happened to you that you don't understand and that you can't explain, and you're not even sure how to describe, because you know you sound nuts. You sound absolutely kooky and insane. There's so many people all around us who are holding these kinds of experiences inside because there's no good, sane way to talk about it. And I don't care. Like, I'm cool with people thinking I'm nuts or not believing me. I mean, I'm telling you, I'm not a liar. Whatever else I am, I'm a truthful person. Max, would you?
I would say I believe everything that you're saying. You're not a person who is given to flights of fancy. You're not a person who makes things up to garner attention. You're just not that kind of person, which is why I believe everything that you're saying right now.
I mean, I get so much attention in my life. I don't need more attention. No. My God, if I get any more attention, I'm going to have to smack myself. And this is not good attention, by the way. Like, having people think that you're full of shit or crazy or a liar, that's not the kind of attention anybody wants. And these experiences scare me, because when I remember them, when I try to talk to you about them, I become so anxious and paranoid, like I'm telling you something I'm not supposed to tell you. And I push back against that hard, because if I did imagine this, then it's my brain and my imagination, and I alone control it. And someday, you know, maybe there'll be an explanation. You know, one of these days in my spare time, maybe I'll do some sort of hypnotic regression, and I'll have an expert take me back to that night in Wilmington when something happened that it scares me to even talk about, and I lost all that time. And I'll tell you something else now. I love Wilmington. And I go back all the time, any chance I get. Do you know where I've never returned?
To that road that went around the pond?
I won't even go to that apartment complex or that pond. I was there not too long ago with my husband. And we were cruising around, and I was showing him some of the places that I worked and hung out, and some of my favorite spots. And we were on Highway 421. And I said, I used to live over there, and I gestured. And he goes, where? And I said, it's over there. And he goes, let's go look. And I said, nah, there's other stuff I want you to see. Let's go to Wrightsville Beach. That's not like me either. It's not like me at all. And it's not like I think something would happen if I went back. All I can say is I don't want to. I don't want to in a way that is so visceral that I don't want to. And it wasn't terribly long after this happened that I got headhunted by a fellow Temple Owl for a job that led me to Charlotte. That's how I ended up meeting Bob Lacey, and that's how my whole life spun and changed on a dime, and I ended up in radio and sitting here talking to you right now on the Oddcast. And I've never been back, and I can't imagine that I would go back. I don't know why, but it's just a place I don't want I don't want to see. Not in daylight, not at nighttime. Don't know why. So, we're going to end this episode of the Oddcast by saying thank you for listening to a story that has no ending, no real beginning, doesn't make a lot of sense, and you're probably thinking isn't true. That's how a lot of these stories are. And if you have one that you'd like to share, I would love for you to reach out, because maybe you would feel better if you could tell it to somebody who won't understand it any better than you do. But people, I believe you. I believe you, because I know that there's all kinds of things that happen that make zero sense. That doesn't mean they didn't happen. That's it for today's Oddcast. If you would like to reach out and share something, a missing time experience, something inexplicable, something that when you poke at it, you find yourself shying away, you can reach us at hello@bobandsherry.com. hello@bobandsherry.com. Or if you have our app, you can tap the microphone in the bottom right corner of the screen and send us a talkback message, and we'll reach out to you. Our website is bobandsherry.com. Whatever dimension you're in, whatever planet you hail from, whoever you are, we so thank you for listening. You're the reason we do it. We'll see you next time on the Oddcast.